Hello everyone! Today I will tell you about a film where a young mother meets a Russian man and follows all his orders, and it's a movie called Passion Simple. For the past year, Helen had been hoping that her lover would call her. She lives an ordinary life. She has a good job and a son, but she feels like she's living in a dream. On sleepless nights, Helen remembers her trip to Porto, where she had a great time. When her son went to study, Alexander came to visit and they spent time together. On the way to the cinema, Helen falls asleep and immediately imagines Alexander, who is lying next to her. Her friend noticed that Helen felt lonely. She suggested that she download a dating app and try to find a boyfriend. However, Helen cannot stop thinking about Alexander. A friend suggests forgetting him because Alexander is married and sooner or later will return back to Russia to his family. Helen says that a long time ago, a lover came to her aunt. However, Helen did not condemn her, but rather was proud of her. After a while, a call came on the phone. Alexander called her and made an appointment in 20 minutes. Helen happily agrees and puts on her best clothes. After 20 minutes, Alexander comes into the house. Helen cannot contain her feelings and they spend time together. A little later, Alexander gets dressed, looks at Helen and leaves. Helen is awakened by her son, who cannot get home. This is due to the fact that Helen locked the door so that her son would not see Alexander. In her free time, Helen writes a novel, but her meeting with Alexander is replaying in her head. She gets the idea to find his photo on the internet. In it, Alexander stands next to his wife. Tomorrow, Alexander will again visit Helen. Lying on the bed, he says that he has never experienced such feelings, and he is very glad that he met Helen. On weekdays, Helen is forced to go to work, after which she runs to Alexander. After drinking alcohol, they make love again. Before leaving, Helen gives Alexander a gift, a love letter which he must read later. Alexander calls her gift very sweet, but he already needs to leave for his wife. Inside the note, Helen admitted that she thinks about Alexander every day. Helen decided to start learning Russian to become closer to Alexander.
Сегодня идет снег.
Сегодня идет снег.
During a new meeting, Helen jokingly calls Alexander a spy, but he replies that he is not a spy. Then Helen asks, how did a man with many prison tattoos end up in the embassy? Alexander avoids answering and says that the French are afraid of the Russians and the start of the war, but Helen is different. She's not afraid of him. That's why he's with her. Helen says that she is always happy with Alexander, and it doesn't matter to her that he has a wife, and that only Alexander decides when they can see each other. Alexander gets up and admits that he doesn't know when they can meet again. He and his wife are leaving for Moscow for 3 weeks, but maybe longer. Helen gets very upset. Every day that follows, Helen feels as depressed as possible. To somehow dispel the point, Helen asks her son to go on a short trip. Everything in the city reminds her of Alexander. When Helen comes to church, she cannot hold back her tears. The woman notices Helen and asks her to make 3 wishes. At least one wish will definitely come true. Helen listened to the woman and threw a note with a wish. After a while, a call came on the phone. Helen picks up the phone and hears Alexander. She immediately allows the students to leave and gathers her things as quickly as possible. Alexander allowed Helen to get into his car. She wonders if he is afraid if someone sees them. Alexander answers no. Helen comes up with the idea to film Alexander so as not to forget him when he leaves. When the couple arrived home, Alexander changed a lot. He doesn't like that Helen dresses in clothes that might attract other men on the street. Helen doesn't understand. Does she really need to sit at home forever and wait for his call? Alexander orders to never wear such things again, after which Alexander grabs her and they spend time together. In the evening, a friend called on the phone to make sure that Helen would come to visit her. But Helen says that she really wants to meet Alexander, which is why she cannot come to her. The next time she meets Alexander, she asks questions about Alexander's personal life, because she is very interested in what kind of person he is. Alexander says that he lives on Tverskaya Street, in the center of Moscow. Helen understands that she and Alexander are completely different people. The most surprising thing is that Helen is not at all afraid of this. The friend is trying to convey that Helen needs to end this relationship, but Helen cannot be convinced. After their next meeting, Helen says that she loves Alexander. He does not reciprocate, but on the contrary asks not to call his number again. Helen is afraid that this is their last meeting and asks to stay with her the whole night, but Alexander needs to leave. Helen tells her friend about their last meeting with Alexander. The woman suspects that Helen is blind and may not see that Alexander does not love her. To vent all her anger, Helen beats the ground. After a while, Helen takes her son to school, but receives a message, and in the hope that it is Alexander, Helen did not keep track of the car and practically hits her son. Today, Alexander comes to her, but Helen doesn't want to let him in. He grabs Helen and convinces her to open the door, after which they spend time together. For the next few weeks, Alexander did not call her at all, which is why Helen called the embassy herself. Hearing the name Helen, the woman hangs up. Helen called again and demanded to see Alexander. When Alexander answered the phone, she made an appointment. At the appointed time, Helen arrived at the hotel, but Alexander never arrived. It turns out he secretly left for Moscow. Helen walked around the city all night with tears in her eyes. All day, her son wondered where his mother had gone. He does not understand what is happening to Helen, and the boy calls his father. He doesn't like that Helen is a bad influence on their son, which is why he takes the son for himself. And even though she lost her son, Helen still hopes to meet Alexander. On the street, she sees Alexander in every man. She even imagines that he is next to her. And when he returns home, he lies down on the ground where his car has always been parked. Autumn has begun. Helen wants to get a doctor's certificate of illness so she doesn't have to go to work. The doctor sees that the woman is unwell and asks her to tell her story. Helen talks about her relationship with Alexander. Ultimately, Helen came up with the idea to buy tickets to Moscow and try to find Alexander on Tverskaya Street. Sitting on a bench, she peers at Russian women. But she never managed to find Alexander. 8 months later, Helen and her son reconciled again. Now he lives at her house again. She even practically managed to forget Alexander. But all attempts to start a new life were ruined by Alexander, who decided to call her on the phone. Helen immediately asks her son to go to his grandmother. The son doesn't want to go anywhere, but Helen forces him to leave. After a while, Alexander comes and they spend time together again. Helen offers to stay with her until the morning, but he refuses and Helen takes him to the hotel. Alexander admits that he loves her, but Helen understands that they are unlikely to see each other again. And at this point, the film comes to an end. Subscribe to the channel if you liked the video. Do not forget to leave your comments. See you very soon. Bye.